January 21st, 1968. Khe Sanh Combat Base, Quang Tri Province. 5:47 a.m. The fog sits low over the plateau, thick enough to swallow sound. Corporal Raymond Ray Sanchez, United States Marine Corps, pulls his poncho tighter as he steps out of the bunker. The air is cold, unnaturally cold for Vietnam, biting through wet fabric and bone. Red mud clings to his boots. Somewhere beyond the wire, beyond the haze, the jungle is awake. Khe Sanh always feels wrong at dawn. Too quiet, too exposed. The base sits like a scar carved into the highlands near the Laotian border. An old French airstrip surrounded by rolling hills with names Marines know by heart. Hill 881 North, 881 South, Hill 861. Each one rises like a loaded gun pointed straight at the runway. Ray checks his M16 and scans the tree line. Then it happens. A single deep concussion punches through the fog. The ground trembles. A half-second later, the world explodes. Artillery slams into the base with a violence Ray has never felt before. Dirt, metal, and fire erupt around the perimeter. The air fills with the shriek of incoming rounds. North Vietnamese 130mm artillery firing from sanctuaries across the border. Someone yells, "Incoming!" Ray dives. The Siege of Khe Sanh has begun. For months, intelligence officers had warned this place mattered, or didn't. No one could quite agree. Khe Sanh was remote, isolated, sitting astride Route 9 near Laos, miles from major population centers. To some in Washington, it was a tripwire, bait to draw North Vietnamese forces into a conventional fight where American firepower could destroy them. To others, it was a liability, a base that could be surrounded, cut off, bled dry. The Marines stationed here, roughly 6,000 men of the 26th Marine Regiment, reinforced by Army units and South Vietnamese allies, didn't debate theory. They lived the ground truth. They knew the hills, they knew the weather, and they knew the enemy had been moving closer for weeks. Patrols had reported increased activity, more trails, more bunkers, more voices at night. Captured documents hinted at something larger assembling in the shadows. Still, nothing prepared them for the scale. By mid-January 1968, North Vietnamese Army, NVA forces, nearly 30,000 troops, including elite divisions, had quietly taken positions around the base. Artillery was dragged through jungle and mountains by hand, ammunition stockpiled, fire plans rehearsed. Khe Sanh wasn't just being harassed, it was being encircled. At Hill 881 South, Lieutenant Philip Caputo, recently returned to Vietnam as a correspondent, watches Marines scramble to respond. Bunkers shake, radios crackle. The sky is invisible behind smoke and fog. The shelling doesn't stop, it comes in waves. Calculated, measured. The NVA isn't firing wildly. They are targeting ammunition dumps, fuel bladders, aircraft on the ground. One lucky, or unlucky, round detonates a massive ammo cache, sending a fireball hundreds of feet into the air. For a moment, the fog glows orange. Then it goes dark again. Inside the command bunker, Colonel David Lowndes, base commander, listens to reports stack up. Runway damaged. Perimeter breached in places, casualties mounting. But the base holds. Lowndes understands immediately what this is. Not a raid, not a probe. This is a siege. And it's happening just days before Tet, the Lunar New Year, when enemy activity traditionally slows. Instead, it's accelerating. For the North Vietnamese, Khe Sanh is symbolic. It sits near Laos, near the Ho Chi Minh Trail, the logistical artery feeding communist forces across South Vietnam. American control of Khe Sanh threatens observation, interdiction, and pressure on that lifeline. But more than that, Khe Sanh offers something else, a chance to repeat history. In 1954, the French had fortified a remote base at Dien Bien Phu, believing air power and artillery would sustain them. The Viet Minh surrounded it, cut it off, and destroyed it. The parallels are impossible to ignore. American commanders know this. The press knows this. The enemy knows this. And everyone is watching. President Lyndon B. Johnson reportedly has a scale model of Khe Sanh installed in the White House, lights marking enemy positions. He asks about it constantly. "Is Khe Sanh secure?" he demands. The answer is always careful. It's holding. For the Marines inside the wire, holding becomes a way of life. Days blur together under constant shelling. Bunkers flood. Rats grow fat. Sleep comes in minutes, not hours. Food arrives by air, when the runway is usable. When it isn't, cargo planes perform low-altitude extraction parachute system, LAPs, drops, skimming the runway and kicking pallets out the back under fire. Every landing is a gamble. Every takeoff, a prayer. North Vietnamese gunners learn the schedule. They adjust. So do the Marines. A grim rhythm sets in. Shelling, repair, shelling again. Ray Sanchez learns to tell the difference between outgoing and incoming rounds by sound alone. He learns how long he has between the whistle and the impact. He learns which bunkers are strongest. He learns that fear never goes away. It just becomes background noise. Outside the wire, the jungle crawls with enemy movement. Trenches inch closer each night. Sappers probe for weak points. Snipers wait patiently, sometimes for days, for a single exposed head. The Marines respond with artillery of their own. Operation Niagara, a massive aerial and artillery campaign designed to obliterate enemy forces around Khe Sanh. B-52 bombers strike in patterns so precise, Marines are warned to take cover from the shock waves. The ground lifts, the hills shudder, the jungle is torn apart, and still. The NVA remains. They dig deeper. They move at night. They absorb punishment, just as they have everywhere else. By the end of the first week, it becomes clear to everyone inside Khe Sanh. This is not about a quick victory. This is about endurance. The North Vietnamese believe time favors them. The Marines believe firepower favors them. Both sides are willing to pay the price to find out who's right. And somewhere beyond the fog, beyond the hills, the rest of Vietnam is about to explode into chaos with the Tet Offensive, an event that will reshape the war entirely. But here, at Khe Sanh, the rules are already different. This is not maneuver warfare. This is a test of wills. A base that was never meant to become famous is now the center of the world. And the question hangs heavy in the cold air. Will Khe Sanh fall? Or will it become something else entirely? January 23rd, 1968. Khe Sanh Combat Base. 2:18 p.m. The runway burns. A North Vietnamese artillery round punches into the tarmac, just as a C-130 Hercules begins its final approach. The blast throws shrapnel and chunks of asphalt into the air. The pilot aborts, throttling up hard as smoke and debris claw at the underbelly of the aircraft. Inside the base, Marines watch it climb away. Another supply run denied. Colonel David Lowndes doesn't slam his fist on the table. He doesn't curse. He just exhales slowly, because this confirms what he already knows. Khe Sanh is no longer merely surrounded. It is being systematically sealed. Within days of the first bombardment, North Vietnamese gunners adjust their fire with chilling precision. The runway is cratered again and again. Fuel bladders explode in black columns of smoke. Ammunition dumps are deliberately targeted, forcing Marines to scatter stockpiles and bury supplies under layers of sandbags and dirt. The message is clear. The enemy isn't trying to overrun the base yet. They're trying to starve it. Every shell is an argument. You cannot hold this place forever. On Hill 861, Lance Corporal James Jimmy Rourke peers through his binoculars at a tree line that looks wrong. Too neat, too still. He's learned that the jungle never sits quietly unless something is hiding beneath it. He calls it in. Minutes later, Marine artillery responds. 150 mm rounds arcing overhead, smashing into the slope. Trees vanish in clouds of earth and splinters. When the smoke clears, the hill is scarred, but movement resumes by nightfall. The NVA adapts instantly. They don't mass, they disperse, they dig. By late January, trench systems snake closer to the wire, zigzagging to avoid enfilade fire, reinforced with logs, concealed under camouflage nets. The enemy has studied this kind of warfare for decades. This is siegecraft, old, patient, relentless. Inside the bunkers, Marines learn to live underground. Daylight is dangerous. Anyone standing too long above ground risks sniper fire or shrapnel. Radios crackle with casualty reports. Medics work by flashlight, hands slick with blood and mud. The wounded are flown out when weather permits. When it doesn't, they wait. Ray Sanchez helps carry a stretcher to a makeshift aid station after a round collapses part of the trench line. The Marine on it is barely conscious, eyes wide, lips blue from shock. Ray doesn't ask his name. He's learned not to. Washington watches closely. Too closely. General William Westmoreland, commander of U.S. forces in Vietnam, becomes convinced that Khe Sanh represents an opportunity. He believes the NVA has committed major forces in a conventional posture, and that American firepower can destroy them. This is the battle he's been waiting for. He orders Operation Niagara expanded. Sensors, acoustic and seismic, are dropped across the surrounding jungle. Every detected movement triggers artillery or airstrikes. The base becomes the focal point of one of the heaviest concentrations of firepower in the history of warfare. B-52s pound suspected assembly areas. Fighter bombers scream overhead. Artillery fires day and night. The hills are chewed apart, yet the enemy does not retreat. They endure. By early February, the weather turns against the Marines. Fog rolls in thick and unyielding. Monsoon rains soak everything, rifles, radios, body. Aircraft struggle to land. Air support becomes sporadic. The siege tightens. Rations are cut. Water is rationed. Every bullet matters. The Marines joke darkly that Khe Sanh has become a small island surrounded by enemy ocean. The joke doesn't land. Too close to truth. Then, on January 30th, the war detonates. The Tet Offensive erupts across South Vietnam. Cities explode into violence. Saigon burns. The U.S. Embassy is attacked. Bases, towns, and provincial capitals are struck simultaneously. For a moment, it seems like Khe Sanh was a feint, a distraction to pull American attention north, while the real blow falls elsewhere. Inside the base, Marines hear fragments of news over the radio. Hue is under attack. Da Nang is fighting street to street. Saigon is chaos. Ray Sanchez stares at the radio in disbelief. They thought Khe Sanh was the main event. Now they're not so sure. For the North Vietnamese, the timing is deliberate. Khe Sanh pins down American forces and attention. It absorbs enormous resources. It demands constant reassurance from Washington. Even as the siege continues, its strategic value multiplies. Every bomb dropped here is one not dropped elsewhere. Every Marine held here is one not reinforcing cities under attack. The base does not need to fall. It only needs to hold attention. This realization creeps slowly through the American command structure. Quietly, uncomfortably. In early February, A North Vietnamese assault probes the perimeter. It's swift, violent, repelled with heavy losses. But it reveals something chilling. The enemy is not desperate. They are testing, measuring. They can choose when to attack and when not to. Time remains their ally. Inside the command bunker, Colonel Lowndes reviews casualty lists and supply projections. He knows the comparisons being made. Bien, bien fou. The difference, he reminds himself, is air power. The Americans will not be cut off completely. They cannot be. And yet, the runway remains shattered. Weather remains unpredictable. Enemy fire remains constant. Certainty erodes. By mid-February, Khe Sanh has become something else. Not a base, a symbol. The Marines inside understand it instinctively. They are no longer fighting for ground. They are fighting to prove something. That this war is not the last one to be decided by patience alone. That American power can still impose outcomes. Outside the wire, the North Vietnamese are fighting for something equally abstract. Proof that endurance can defeat technology. That time can outlast bombs. That history can repeat itself, even when the names and flags change. And so the siege continues. Not with a final charge, not with a dramatic collapse, but with a slow grind of pressure, shell by shell, day by day. Khe Sanh refuses to fall. But the question grows louder with every passing hour. At what cost? February 10th, 1968. Khe Sanh Combat Base, 4:57 a.m. Dawn never really arrives at Khe Sanh. It seeps in, gray and uncertain, through fog thick enough to swallow the hills. The jungle is quiet in a way that feels unnatural, as if it's holding its breath. Then the shelling starts again. The first round lands short. The second slams into a bunker roof, showering sandbags and splintered wood into the trench. Marines roll out of their cots and into fighting positions without speaking. They've learned the rhythm. Sleep comes in fragments now, 10 minutes here, 20 there. Never deep enough to dream. Lance Corporal James Rourke checks his watch out of habit. He stopped caring about the time weeks ago. The North Vietnamese artillery never fires randomly. By February, it is methodical. Targeting known coordinates, rotating firing positions, adjusting ranges with each volley. Marines notice the pattern even if they can't stop it. The enemy is conserving ammunition. That fact unsettles them more than the explosions. It suggests confidence. Inside the base, everything has been buried. Fuel drums are underground. Ammunition is dispersed in shallow pits. Command posts are reinforced with logs, steel plates, and layers of earth. The Marines live like moles now, emerging only when necessary. Every exposed movement is calculated, every cigarette smoked under cover. Even laughter feels dangerous. Supply drops become a spectacle of precision and risk. With the runway unusable, cargo aircraft approach under fire, dropping pallets from low altitude while Marine signal panels flash through the haze. Some loads land cleanly, others don't. Parachutes drift into enemy territory. Crates smash open on impact. Ammunition scatters. Food disappears into the jungle. Every lost pallet is felt immediately. Rations shrink. Meals become mechanical. Calories, not comfort. Ray Sanchez eats cold beans from a dented can, crouched in a trench that smells of mud and cordite. He chews slowly, listening to the distant thump of artillery. "This place," someone mutters nearby, "ain't worth this." No one answers. Outside the wire, the North Vietnamese dig closer. Their trenches creep forward at night, zigzagging to minimize exposure, reinforced with timber cut miles away and hauled in by hand. Each morning, Marines spot new earthworks where there were none before. The distance shrinks, meters at a time, patience as a weapon. On Hill 881 South, a Marine observation post takes direct fire. A bunker collapses under repeated hits. 2 Marines are killed instantly. A third is pulled free with broken legs and shrapnel wounds. Evacuation is delayed for hours by fog. The medic keeps him alive by talking about home, about anything, while the man fades in and out of consciousness. He survives. Barely. Not everyone does. In Washington, Khe Sanh has become obsession. President Lyndon B. Johnson reportedly keeps a model of the base in the White House, demanding constant updates. He remembers the French defeat at Dien Bien Phu. He does not intend to preside over an American version. The pressure flows downhill. Westmoreland doubles down on firepower. More airstrikes, more artillery, more tonnage dropped on the surrounding hills than anywhere else in Vietnam. The base is encircled by devastation, cratered earth, flattened jungle. The landscape becomes unrecognizable, but the enemy remains. North Vietnamese soldiers sheltered deep underground, emerging only when necessary. Their supply lines stretch back through Laos and beyond, feeding the siege quietly, relentlessly. Captured prisoners reveal little. They don't need to. Their presence says enough. By mid-February, the Marines realize something unsettling. The North Vietnamese are not preparing for a final assault. They are content to wait. Time presses harder on the defenders than the attackers. Every day inside Khe Sanh costs the United States men, resources, attention. For Hanoi, the cost is acceptable. For Washington, it is political, psychological, uncomfortable. The Marines feel that difference instinctively. They count incoming rounds. They count casualties. They count days. The enemy counts none of it. Then comes another probe. A coordinated attack against multiple perimeter points, testing reaction times, probing weak spots. It's violent but brief, withdrawn almost as soon as it begins. Again, the message is clear. We decide when this ends. After the attack, Ray Sanchez sits with his back against a bunker wall, helmet resting beside him. His hands shake, not from fear exactly, but from exhaustion that has seeped into his bones. I used to think, he says quietly to no one in particular, that holding ground meant something. Rourke looks at him. Doesn't it? Ray shrugs. I don't know anymore. The realization spreads through the base, unspoken but shared. Khe Sanh is no longer about victory. It's about not losing, and those are very different things. By late February, intelligence reports suggest that major North Vietnamese units are shifting. Some may be redeploying, others remain. No one is certain. The fog of war is literal now. Clouds grounding aircraft, obscuring sensors, blinding eyes. Commanders argue over interpretations. Is the enemy preparing to withdraw, or simply adjusting posture? At Khe Sanh, the Marines don't speculate. They wait. The siege grinds on. Shelling, repairs, more shelling. The cycle becomes the war. Every morning that the flag still flies feels like defiance. Every night survived feels like luck. And yet, despite everything, Khe Sanh holds. The perimeter remains intact. The Marines remain in position. The base does not fall. That fact alone becomes its own kind of weapon. A counter-argument to the enemy's patience. Proof, perhaps, that endurance cuts both ways. But even as the siege drags into its second month, a quieter question begins to surface. One that no amount of firepower can silence. If this place can be held, should it be? February 28th, 1968. Khe Sanh Combat Base. 6:19 m.p.m. The sun drops behind the hills like a dimmer switch being turned down. Shadows stretch across the shattered airstrip. Craters fill with darkness. The jungle exhales, releasing fog that crawls low and slow, wrapping the base in a cold, wet blanket. Night at Khe Sanh is never quiet. If the guns aren't firing, something else is moving. The Marines have learned to read the darkness. A cough that stops too quickly, metal clicking against a rock, the soft thud of earth being shifted by hand. Trip flares snap to life in blinding white arcs, briefly freezing the world into harsh contrast. Wire, mud, bodies pressed flat against the ground. Then darkness returns. And with it, the waiting. Inside the command bunker, maps are spread across a wooden table scarred by shrapnel. Pins mark enemy positions, some confirmed, many guessed. The edges blur where certainty ends. Colonel David Lowndes, the base commander, listens as his staff runs through the nightly reports. Ammo levels are holding, barely. Medical supplies are tight. Morale is difficult to quantify. Lowndes nods, says little. He knows what they're all thinking. Holding Khe Sanh was once framed as a strategic necessity. A blocking position near the Laotian border, a tripwire against infiltration, a symbol of resolve. Now, none of that feels solid. The Marines are holding because they were told to, and because leaving under fire would be worse. Word filters in through Armed Forces radio. The Tet Offensive has shaken the country, cities attacked, embassies breached. Television screens back home show fighting in places Americans were told were safe. The war no longer feels distant. And suddenly, Khe Sanh isn't the center of attention anymore. That realization cuts deep. They are bleeding in silence. On the perimeter, Lance Corporal Rourke and his fire team rotate positions every few hours. Boots sink into mud, worn slick by constant traffic. The smell never leaves. Wet earth, rotting vegetation, burned powder. Rourke peers through his night vision scope, scanning tree lines that refuse to give anything back. Feels like they're watching, someone whispers. They always are, Rourke replies. The North Vietnamese keep the pressure steady, not overwhelming, just constant. Harassment fire, snipers, sudden barrages timed to hit during resupply drops or medevac attempts. They don't need to break the base. They only need to remind the Marines that escape is impossible. By early March, the air war intensifies again. Operation Niagara reaches its peak. B-52 Stratofortresses unleash carpet bombing so close that Marines feel the shock waves roll through their chests, knocking dust from bunker ceilings. The earth trembles for hours. The hills are pulverized. The jungle is shredded. If raw, destructive power could decide the siege, it would end here. But when the bombs stop, the silence fills with the same unanswered question. Did it work? Recon patrols report enemy movement afterward. Not massed formations, not retreats. Movement, repair, adjustment. The enemy absorbs the blow and flows around it, just like they always have. In Saigon and Washington, commanders begin to reconsider the calculus. If the North Vietnamese wanted Khe Sanh, why haven't they taken it? Why not commit to a decisive assault? The answer, slowly emerging, is unsettling. Because Khe Sanh is more valuable alive than destroyed. It pins American attention, consumes resources, forces escalation. The siege is not about capturing ground. It's about shaping the war. Inside the wire, the Marines sense this shift, even if they don't articulate it. They are no longer bait, but they are part of something larger than themselves. A demonstration, a message. On March 10th, a rare, clear morning allows multiple medevac flights to land. Stretchers are loaded quickly. Faces are pale. Eyes closed. One Marine grips the edge of a litter as he's carried aboard. "Did we hold?" he asks the corpsman, The corpsman hesitates, then nods. Yeah, he says. Hostile we held. The helicopter lifts off, vanishing into cloud. The base remains. That afternoon, Lowndes receives new intelligence. Enemy units appear to be pulling back from some forward positions, not retreating, repositioning. The distinction matters. It suggests the siege may be entering a new phase, not ending, evolving. The Marines react cautiously. No cheers, no celebrations. They've learned better. Hope is expensive here. At night, the shelling eases slightly, just enough for men to notice, just enough to make the quiet uncomfortable. Rourke sits in his bunker, helmet off, writing a letter he may never send. He struggles to explain what Khe Sanh means. How do you describe a place that refuses to break, but refuses to matter the way you were told it would? By mid-March, the conversation changes again. Relief forces are assembling. A ground operation is planned to reopen Route 9, not to attack the enemy, to prove access, to prove Khe Sanh is not isolated. The message is as much for Washington as it is for Hanoi. The Marines hear the distant rumble of armor days before they see it. A sound almost forgotten. Engines, movement, approach. For the first time in months, something is coming toward them instead of falling from the sky. As dawn breaks, helicopters appear in formation. Hueys cutting through mist, rotors whipping fog into spirals. Infantry follows, pushing through terrain once thought impassable. The relief is real, but it doesn't feel like victory. Not the kind anyone imagined. Khe Sanh is held, but the question has shifted again. Not can it be held, but what did holding it actually accomplish? That answer will not come quickly. It will unfold slowly, long after the guns fall silent. April 1st, 1968. Route 9, 8:12 a.m. The sound comes first. A low, mechanical growl rolling through the hills, unfamiliar enough to make Marines pause mid-step. Then the jungle parts. M48. Patton tanks emerge from the fog, steel hulls scarred, antennas whipping, infantry moving alongside them in tight formation. Mud cakes their boots. Faces are hollowed by weeks in the field. Operation Pegasus has arrived. The ground link to Khe Sanh is open. For the men inside the combat base, the moment feels unreal. Not relief, not celebration, disorientation. For 77 days, the world had been reduced to bunkers, perimeter wire, artillery coordinates, and the sky. Now suddenly there are roads again, vehicles, columns stretching beyond sight. Normalcy feels intrusive, almost offensive. Lance Corporal Rourke watches the tanks pass with an expression he can't name. He expected to feel something sharper. Instead, he feels tired. So deeply tired that even survival feels abstract. Someone slaps him on the shoulder. "We made it, man." Rourke nods, but his eyes stay on the road. The official narrative forms quickly. Khe Sanh held. The Marines stood fast. American firepower proved decisive. Comparisons to Dien Bien Phu are dismissed with confidence. This time, the base did not fall. The enemy was repelled. The siege was broken. But beneath the headlines, doubts spread quietly. Why, if Khe Sanh was so critical, are there already discussions about reducing its importance? Why does victory feel temporary? Why do intelligence reports suggest North Vietnamese units withdrew intact? Within days of Pegasus, the shelling stops almost entirely. The jungle goes quiet in a way that feels deliberate. Too clean, too complete. It becomes clear that the enemy did not break contact. They chose to disengage. In Saigon, briefings grow tense again. Colonel James Ellsworth, now watching Khe Sanh from a distance, studies updated maps. Red circles once crowding the base begin to thin. Enemy forces have melted away, not destroyed, relocated. Ellsworth voices what many are thinking, but few want to say. They never intended to take it, he tells a closed-room audience. Silence answers him. They intended to fix us in place, to draw air power, to distract from Tet, to force escalation. Someone objects. Then why stay so long? Ellsworth doesn't hesitate, because time was on their side. That realization lands hard. The Siege of Khe Sanh, once framed as a defensive stand, now looks like a strategic exchange. The United States committed enormous resources, bombing, troops, attention, to defend a base the enemy ultimately didn't need. The North Vietnamese forced America to fight on terms that favored endurance, not decisiveness. Back at Khe Sanh, the Marines feel the shift before they understand it. Orders change, patrols are reduced, talk of redeployment begins, rumors circulate, unconfirmed, unsettling, that the base may be abandoned. Rourke hears it first from a sergeant who doesn't look him in the eye. Word is, we might be pulling out. When? Rourke asks. The sergeant shrugs. Soon. The idea feels impossible. They bled for this ground, died for it, endured months of siege, and now it might simply be given up. On June 22nd, 1968, the orders become official. Khe Sanh Combat Base will be evacuated, systematically, deliberately, everything of value removed or destroyed, nothing left behind. The reaction is muted. There are no protests, no outbursts. Just a deep, quiet anger that has nowhere to go. As engineers rig bunkers with explosives, Marines pack gear they once thought they'd never leave with. The airstrip, once cratered, then painstakingly repaired, is torn apart again, this time by American hands. Rourke walks the perimeter one last time. The wire still stands. The bunkers still face outward. The jungle looks exactly the same as it did the night the siege began. Indifferent, patient. When the final charges are set, helicopters lift off in waves. The base erupts in controlled detonations, smoke climbing skyward like a funeral pyre. From above, Khe Sanh collapses into itself, a scar reclaimed by green. In Washington, the decision is framed as a strategic realignment, a shift in priorities, resources better used elsewhere. Privately, the meaning is clearer. Khe Sanh could be held, but it could not be justified. The siege becomes a lesson, not about defeat, not even about victory, but about limits. For the North Vietnamese, Khe Sanh confirms a theory. They tested American endurance. They measured response time. They studied escalation. And they learned something critical. America would fight ferociously to avoid symbolic loss, but struggled to define symbolic gain. The siege also reinforces a broader truth. Firepower can prevent defeat, but it cannot impose conclusions. Years later, historians will argue endlessly. Was Khe Sanh a feint, a diversion, a missed opportunity? The answer depends on where you stand. For Rourke, the meaning is simpler. Khe Sanh is the place where he learned the war would not end cleanly, where survival didn't feel like winning, where holding ground didn't guarantee purpose. The siege lasted 77 days. The lessons lasted much longer. Khe Sanh did not fall, but it didn't matter the way America needed it to. And in that contradiction lies the quiet turning point of the war. The base is gone now. The hills are silent again. But the truth remains, etched into planning rooms and memory alike. The war could be fought. It could be endured. But it could not be forced to end on American terms. Late 1968, Washington, D.C. The war has entered a quieter phase on paper. Briefings still happen. Charts are still updated. Maps still glow under fluorescent lights. But something fundamental has shifted. The urgency is gone, not because the fighting has stopped, but because expectations have changed. Inside the Pentagon, Khe Sanh is no longer discussed as a battle. It is discussed as a case study. What it proved, what it failed to prove, what it revealed about the limits of American power. For years, U.S. military doctrine had relied on a simple premise. Superior firepower, applied decisively, would force the enemy to break. Khe Sanh shattered that assumption, not because the Marines failed. They did everything asked of them. They held, they survived, they inflicted losses. But survival was not the same as leverage. The siege demonstrated something unsettling. The United States could prevent defeat almost indefinitely, yet still struggled to create a victory that mattered strategically. North Vietnamese planners understood this long before Washington did. Khe Sanh was never meant to be a decisive battlefield. It was meant to be a pressure point, a place to fix American attention, a place to draw air power, a place to consume time. And time, more than territory, had become the real currency of the war. General Vo Nguyen Giap, often portrayed as obsessed with set-piece victories, was in fact testing endurance. Could the Americans be forced to commit overwhelming resources to places that did not decide the war? Could they be made to fight symbolically rather than strategically? Khe Sanh answered yes. While tens of thousands of tons of bombs fell around a single remote base, the wider war continued elsewhere. Logistics moved, units repositioned, political momentum shifted. Khe Sanh did not fail militarily. It succeeded politically for the other side. Back in the field, Marines returned from the siege changed, not broken, not defeated, but quieter, less convinced that courage alone could define outcomes. Lance Corporal Rourke returned stateside months later. When people ask him if Khe Sanh was a victory, he pauses. He struggles to explain the feeling that they held ground that was later abandoned, that they survived something that didn't move the war closer to ending, that heroism existed alongside futility. He eventually settles on a sentence that feels closest to the truth. "We did our job," he says, and stops there. For American leadership, Khe Sanh accelerates a reckoning already underway. If a base can be held at enormous cost and still be strategically disposable, then what exactly is being fought for? Within a year, policies begin to shift. Vietnamization, gradual withdrawal, negotiations. The language of certainty is replaced by the language of exit. Khe Sanh does not cause these changes, but it confirms them. For the North Vietnamese, the lesson is even clearer. They do not need to defeat American forces outright. They need only ensure that the war continues longer than American patience. Khe Sanh proves that the United States will fight fiercely, but not endlessly. The siege becomes part of a broader pattern, one seen at the Ho Chi Minh Trail, at Tet, in the years that follow. A war designed not to be won quickly, but to outlast. Today, the hills around Khe Sanh are quiet. The jungle has reclaimed the scars. Concrete bunkers crumble beneath vines. Few visitors come. Fewer still understand what happened there. But Khe Sanh remains one of the clearest windows into the nature of the Vietnam War, a conflict where tactical success could coexist with strategic uncertainty, where survival did not guarantee progress, where holding ground did not mean holding time. The Marines at Khe Sanh did not lose. They endured. And in enduring, they revealed the war's central truth. This was not a conflict that could be ended by force alone. Khe Sanh refused to fall. But more importantly, It forced America to confront a question it had been avoiding. What does victory mean when the enemy is willing to wait longer than you are? That question would linger long after the last helicopter lifted away, long after the last bunker collapsed, long after the siege faded from headlines. Khe Sanh did not end the war, but it marked the moment when many finally understood the war would not end on American terms.